Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I am Yori Folarin. It's all the news. The headship of the Supreme Court of Nigeria has changed, as you know. Justice Tanko resigned suddenly yesterday, and the new helmsman is Justice Olukayode Ariwola. Okay, our guest this morning to look at the implication of Justice Ariwola coming on board at the head of the Supreme Court in an acting capacity, pending when he'll be, his appointment will be confirmed by the National Assembly. Dr. Tunji Abayomi, constitutional lawyer, APC chieftain, is our guest this morning to try and understand, how it's going to go from here on. Good morning, Dr. Tunji Abayomi.
Good morning, distinguished Honorable Folarin.
I wish. A fine morning to you, sir. This is a radical and unexpected change in the sense that it was so sudden. But I don't know. Dwelling on the future rather than on the past, as Justice Tanko has now stepped down and he's been replaced by Justice Olukayode Ariwola, I thought we could talk about the task ahead in terms of reforms, part of which, I don't know if they were related or not, sort of came to the fore when 14 justices of the Supreme Court had actually, a letter that they had written through the CGN had been leaked, indicating that all was not necessarily well in the highest court of the land. So what's the task now looking forward in terms of judicial reform for Justice Kayode Ariwola?
Well, it's important. I will separate the judiciary from the what I would call perplexing neurosis that is besetting our country. Because at this point, there is a need for reform virtually in every sector. But let us look at the judiciary. The problem complained about by the other justices of the Supreme Court. These problems have been there for quite a long time. I would say for the past 30 years. You will recall that there was an instance in which a lawyer, while in court, in the Supreme Court, accused the Chief Justice of Nigeria, as at that time, of corruption in his own court. There was an attempt to harass the lawyer on that occasion. The lawyer maintained his position that he has evidence. So this problem has been there for quite a while. I'm also aware of an instance in which I was handling the case of a judge who was under a lot of pressure simply because he refused to do the bidding, I would say, of the CJN. You will also recall the case of Justice Akombi, who later retired forcefully because of disagreement. So there's a need for major reform. The structural management or the management structure of the judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court, is too weak in order to give honor, perceivable honor, to this nation. When you have a situation where even the Supreme Court of Nigeria, an extraordinary development, is fighting, the justices are fighting amongst themselves, or where a CJN is accused of corruption in a country, you know that the situation of that country is really serious indeed. So, the reform that is necessary is really a reform that will be courageously effected if we are going to improve on the perception of the nation internally and externally in terms of the sectors, the very important sector, the judiciary sector.
Your practice as a lawyer, you often to the Supreme Court. One other aspect of the public knowledge of the highest courts in the land is that it does take its time, except it's a political case. It takes its time. In fact, it's not unheard of for judgments to come from the Supreme Court up to 20 years after the case was still instituted. Now, yes. I wonder if you have, what do you think is the cause of this kind of a situation? Is it like that around the world, that when a case gets to the Supreme Court, it can sometimes take decades to get resolution? Or is it a peculiarity of African, or indeed in this case Nigerian, judicial systems, especially at the Supreme Court?
Well, if we are talking of time, it's actually a tragic situation in the country. And I think, again, it's because of the organization of the courts. I believe there is a need to decentralize the judiciary sector. The same issue that we are complaining about with regard to security, with regard to the economy, with regard to the power of government, the need for decentralization. For example, as it is now, we have cases from all the states of the Federation, and just anybody can appeal cases from even the magistrate court all the way to the Supreme Court. The situation is that the Supreme Court is beset, overwhelmed, I will even say horribly, by so many cases. If you take a situation like the United States of America, the Supreme Court decides the cases it intends to look at. And these are cases of profound effect, either from the standpoint of the Constitution, or profound effect on the nation, on policy and principles. But in our country, a mere disagreement between a tenant and a landlord can end up in the Supreme Court. That is, as at now, no limitation, no restriction, no control, no direction, so to say, restricting any appeal from getting to the Supreme Court once there is disagreement with the decision of the lower court. I think this is part of the problem. If we decentralize the courts in a way that, as it was in the past, as a matter of fact, when we actually had true democracy and true federalism in this country, the states had appeal courts, judiciary was largely independent, and only a few cases will find their way to the Supreme Court. I believe when we return to this, we will have a more orderly administration of justice in the country. Until we do that, justice will continue to suffer in our country. I have a case now in the Court of Appeal between the High Court in Osun State and the Court of Appeal, and we are in Akure, the presiding Court of Appeal. We are now in the 19th year. In the 19th year. I'm not sure I'll be able to finish that case before I leave the world. That is the nature of situation in the judiciary. So there's a need for to take a serious look with the judiciary, in addition to, excuse me, in addition to looking at the entire situation in the country. I have maintained again and again that this nation is placed on what I call twisted pivots. Part of the twisted pivots is an inadequate military constitution foisted on the people of Nigeria. Until we take a look at the foundation of the nation and decide the type of nation we want. And this, of course, will also affect the judiciary. I do not think we can improve on justice and the rule of law.
You know, Dr. Abayomi, I'm curious. You said that if you even have a case that's 19 years long so far in the Supreme Court, and as I was saying,
not even the Supreme Court, it's in the Court of Appeal now.
Oh, Court of Appeal now. Okay.
Yes.
But as I said, I suppose that is without prejudice to the fact that cases can sometimes take up to 20 years at the Supreme Court before getting a resolution. I wanted to ask you, what is this a function? Does this come from how the law came to us? As you know, we're affiliated to the common law of England and that kind of a thing. We are people, everything. We were adopting their practices. There used to be silks. Now we have SANs. But it's coming from, the UK. Is that the way the system is over there too? Or did we Nigerianize it somehow to arrive at the situation that we're talking about now that needs urgent reform?
Well, basically the neuroses besetting the judiciary are Nigerian in nature. The organization of judiciary in most Western countries, very, very tidy. But in our country, it's very untidy. For one, you need to have a more efficient system. You need to have more courts. You need to have more judges. You need to have intelligent and learned judges. So we need to look at the way judges are appointed. We need to have more courts. We need to fund the judiciary. Now, again, I'm going back to the need to decentralize. If you look at the situation of, you just take the security. You can take the situation of the security and transfer the same thing to the judiciary. Now we have security situation in the country. We have one police force. One police force that is largely funded in virtually every state by the states in order to provide to the people minimum security. In other words, the police force is controlled from Abuja. But it is so manifestly ineffective in the states that the states have to keep pumping money in order to move it effectively to help the people of those states to be secure. So now, if in fact the states are largely funding the security in order to make it useful, and it is controlled from Abuja, from the federal government, you can see the disorder. The same thing applies to the judiciary. Everything literally that is done in the judiciary is controlled from Abuja. Whether the appointment of judges, the performance of judges, the rating of judges, the nature of courts, the responsibility of the chief judges of the states, of the several states, and so on and so forth.
How about the independence? How about the independence of the judiciary that you're taught in school? Independence of the separate arms of government.
That is, of course, another problem. The disorder, when you have disorderly system, it tends to gravitate towards corruption and dependency. When you have inefficient system, it tends to gravitate toward disorder and dependency. This is the problem we have. We speak of independence of judiciary. Who can say today, among at least senior lawyers, that the judiciary is not corrupt? There's no one can say that. I know a situation where, for example, a judge refused to take money, and another judge said to him, please, if you don't want it, send it to me. His own chief judge. The problem, of course, is multidimensional in the sense that, okay, how well are judges taken care of? I mean, you look at judges of the Supreme Court complaining about allowance, simple allowance, complaining about offices, about residence, about so many minute and minor things. The other issue that I'd like to focus on, that I'd like to emphasize, is that one of the tragedy of our country is that people who head institutions are beyond the law. We don't have systems that control particularly those who are heading institutions. Isn't that the reason why, for example, the Accountant General of Nigeria could embezzle millions and millions and millions of national wealth, national money? How was he able to do that? The head of pension could embezzle millions and millions and millions. And now, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, who is heading the judiciary, is accused of disorderly behavior with regard to the money allocated to the judiciary. So you can see that we've got structural problem, foundational problem, governmental problem, problems that beset virtually every sector. What is the source of the problem? In my view, the source of the problem is that we have not been able to arrive at a document called the Constitution that will give us good government, orderly government. That is where we are. If we're talking of independence of judiciary, I think we better be talking of dependent judiciary in our country. Of course, you know that the judiciary too also depend largely on funding from the executive. The effect of the executive on the judiciary is overwhelming.
Well, in that regard, Dr. Abayomi, yes. Dr. Abayomi, it's sort of been alleged, indicated in the leaked letter of his brother justices to the former CGN that there was no paucity of funds. It's the management of these funds, the deployment of these funds. I don't know if this is connected to another sort of a health challenge. One of the papers is speculating that perhaps, a memory loss, dementia-related kind of ideas might have been affected, because you had said earlier that, look, tiny little petty things that shouldn't really figure was what, justices of the Supreme Court had to finally complain to him about in the form of a letter. It might well be that health-wise, he wasn't quite up to it. I don't know. But I guess the point I wanted... Yes, but the question I wanted to ask is that... The question I wanted to ask really is, there's a difference between the Supreme Court and, shall we say, the chief judge, the chief justice of the country, and the chief judge of a state. But are they related? These reforms that we're talking about, because we know that there are some states too where some judges have, actually begun procedures to take their matters to court. And I think in one of the states, they are saying that they've settled out of court and about to settle out of court. Is What can be done now?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think it's a problem of dementia or incapacity. The present CJ, judged by the ruling, the decisions, has shown capacity in terms of knowledge of law. I also don't think it's a problem.
That is the former CJ, the former CGN.
Yes, the former, yeah, the retired that just left. Most of his decisions are sound. He's the one, for example, that decided that, against issue of this so-called blasphemy, and said that you cannot, you have no power, to use religious standards to judge any citizen. But the problem, like I said, is control over the power of the leader. Now, when the head has a problem, it's like a human being with a headache. Even the leg cannot function very well, in spite of the distance between the leg and I will even say, even the toe cannot function very well, in spite of the distance between the head and the toe. So, we need in this country to find a way to control the appetite of government, particularly leaders of government. In this our nation, leaders of government at every level, whether you're talking of the governor, whether you're talking of the president, whether you are talking of the head of the judiciary, whether you are talking of the head of pension, or you are talking of the head of the civil service, or you are talking of the head of agency, or even the head of universities, there is too much uncontrolled power vested in them. And when you have such uncontrolled power, you are bound to have abuse. We are talking of a situation where the justices of the Supreme Court understandably complained about the management of the resources, not insufficiency. Is it not the same thing that besets the police? Considering the amount of money that is committed to the police, why should police, for example, not have vehicle merely to move from their stations? See what is happening in the military. We have a situation where the heads of the military, who are supposed to provide money for soldiers to confront insurgency, are providing money for themselves and their children, money they cannot even finish using in their lifetime. So there is a need for a new deal, to use the American expression, a new structure of government that will create greater responsibility of government to the people of Nigeria. We don't have that now. And unless we go to the foundation, we are not going to improve on governance. We are not going to improve on orderly government in Nigeria.
Now, since Justice Olukayode Ariwola is a part of the system, he can actually hit the ground running. He knows what's going on. In fact, he's one of the 14 justices reported to have done this private memo to the former CGN that was somehow leaked to the press. So he knows what it's all about. So I wanted to ask, what are your ideas? What do you think about how easy it will be for him to effect some of these reforms that you are saying are really indispensable to the aspirations that Nigerians have for the highest court in the land? How easy do you think it will be for Ariwola?
Well, it's not going to be easy. Like I told you, if you take corruption, I have said it even in your program, that corruption in our country is like a wasting disease. At the early stage, it's difficult to detect, but easy to cure. But it is now at a late stage, stage 4, it has metastasized. It is now easy to detect, but difficult to cure. He would try, but like I said, the foundation, the structural foundation, has a problem. It's like a house that has a foundational problem. The foundation of a house is problematic. Then the leaking is leaking, but the leaking is not actually the roof. It's because the wall shook or is displaced. So you try to patch it. You patch.
I get the analogy.
You just keep patching. Yes.
You know,
so you need
Dr.
to do, he will do a little bit, but not much, with due regard.
But much is really expected. You know, Nigerians are expecting a lot. Going away, when I had asked the question, how easy or otherwise will it be for the acting CGN, Justice Ariwola, to effect some of these reforms, or at least influence positively some of these reforms that are required within the Supreme Court and in the court systems generally, but limiting ourselves to the Supreme Court for now, you would opine that, well, he'll do what can be done. And the reason for that being that the structural foundation of these reforms that we are talking about leaves a lot to be desired. Could we explore what are these structural reforms that would put an independent arm of government, such as the judiciary, in such a sorry pass, given that Nigerians expect very much from the highest court of our land?
Well, what Nigerians expect to begin with is dispensation of justice as fast as possible. Now, there is no doubt that there will be conflict. There will be cases and controversy in every sector. So, in the management of a nation, you need a sound and serious judiciary. Not only that, you need an efficient judiciary that will dispense justice as quickly as possible and as valuable as possible. As of today, we don't have that in the country. Now, Justice Ariwola will obviously try in terms of efficiency, at least in the Supreme Court. But how much can he do when you have hundreds of cases, hundreds and hundreds of cases? There's, of course, also a need to even take a look at the rules of court, rules of procedure. There are lots of things that are simply delay the dispensation of justice. The issue of service, we spend so much time on whether there was service or not, when in fact, service is just about notice. If a man has notice of a hearing in court, why should we spend so much time, for example, in simple things as motion on service? There are so many small areas of procedure that I believe that His Lordship, Justice Ariwola, should look into. There are lots of cases that can be dispensed, for example, in chambers without a hearing in court. So these are what I would call superficial necessities for reform in the judiciary. But again, you will simply allow me to re-emphasize what I have said before. We need to take a look at this nation foundationally, because the judiciary as it is now, I will say, is a fruit of a poisonous tree, what it is now. In the sense that, what is the poisonous tree? The poisonous tree is the constitution of this nation. And everything that is attached to it, the branches, the fruits, the bark, and so on and so forth, will have a problem. So yes, he will try in order to meet the expectation of the people, like some of his predecessors, like Justice Elias, like Justice, Fatai Williams, and so on and so forth, the old chief justices of the past, he will want to establish a reputation. But the reality of the matter is that the system that is existing now is so polluted with structural disorder and error. The question is, how much can he do? He can't do much. Just as you cannot do much in the security sector with this system, just as you cannot do much in the legislature with what we have now, just as you cannot do much in the government management, regardless, for example, how great the president is in our country today. Let us say he's a holy man. What can he really do?
Because, people, I would imagine, at least some, if not many, I would have been expecting that with this change of guard, something can really be done in the direction of reforms, such as we are talking about. But earlier, and by the way, I recall that Nigeria has supplied some other African countries with their own judges that have become the chief justices. If I remember, I think Botswana is one of those. Not too sure now. So we have the skill, we have the knowledge, we have men of erudition. But you spoke about decentralization earlier in the first half of the program. That idea, could you explain it a bit more? Decentralized, the Supreme Court can be decentralized. Is that done in other countries? And might it help efficiency instead of having courts in the Supreme Court taking 15, 20 years to resolve?
Yes. The states, in my view, what was anticipated and established for Nigeria by the agreement of our people was a federal system where the states have the power and the authority in large measure to manage their affairs, including the judiciary. And then some issues will now go to the Supreme Court. Now, if you take America, which is again another democracy, more or less a senior brother democracy, most of the states have their own judiciary. They even have their own Supreme Courts.
That's right.
Where issues are decided. But as of today, the state's judiciary is extremely dependent on the federal structure. The problem also is that managing such a huge system from a central point is always very difficult and usually very inefficient. So when we are talking of federalism, and people raise all sorts of issues, people display all sorts of anxiety. There's no basis for it. If we want Nigeria to be efficient, if we want to have good government, we have to decentralize. It's just simple. Competition is a trade of life. That's the truth. So when you have the type of competition and rivalry we had at the early stages, that's why it was possible for us to produce for Africa great legal minds. That's why Nigeria was regarded, the judiciary of Nigeria was regarded as one of the leading judiciary in the Commonwealth. That is why our cases were quoted from Fiji to Uganda to South Africa to India. But what do we have today? We don't even have mere international conferences in the rule of law in Nigeria. We don't even share journals, mere journals on development of law with the world. We don't, and yet the truth of the matter is that this nation produces great minds, great minds. So this is it. So we've got to find the source of the neurosis, the source of the problem of our nation. Why are we where we are now? Why are we not advancing Why are we not creating greatness? Why are we disappointing the world? It's not just in other sectors, but even in the judiciary that used to be one of the leading sectors of this nation, one of our gifts, as a matter of fact, to the world. So, again, I go back. When the foundation is bad, it's problematic. The house cannot stand.
Well, thank you for telling us about the case in the U.S., for example, where some states actually, I don't know if it's all states, have their own Supreme Courts. I was just wondering, as you said that, because you also said some cases could go to the Supreme Court. Is it possible that the litigants might still not be satisfied with a matter decided on at a state Supreme Court and would want to proceed, or they are barred, legally barred, that, look, if it's been heard by the Supreme Court of your state, maybe California, for example, you can't go to the Supreme Court of the United States. I was just curious how it works.
Well, the way it works is that, first of all, there are cases that will end in the Supreme Court of the states. And there are cases that will go to the Supreme Court of the Federation. For example, if there is a conflict between a state and the federal government, obviously, it's not an issue that can be decided in the courts of the states. It will have to go to the federal government. Assuming, for example, there is a disagreement between the legislature of the states and the executive wing of the state, that may end up in the state. But if there's a disagreement between the legislature of the state and, for example, the executive of the federal government, you may now have to go to the federal government. So it is actually a constitutional issue. The Constitution will have to make provision, reorganize the judiciary in a way that decentralization of authority within the judicial sector will be effected. That, of course, may also affect other sectors, the management, the training of lawyers, and, education, and so many other things. As it is now, everything, literally everything, is in the hands of God. And yes, the situation we have in our country is that we have something like 37, 38 governments, including the federal government, 36 states, the federal FCT, and the federal government. But one government, the federal government, takes 52% of the entire wealth of the nation and mismanages it. That's why there's so much corruption, stealing, because there's simply too much money in the hands of the federal government, whereas the states are in desperate need to handle their own affairs. So you have to do some level of constitutional change in order to bring about the type of decentralization that I'm talking about.
Well, Dr. Tunji Abayomi, I got to thank you for making time for us this morning to further understand the backdrop to, if you want, the taking over of a new CGN, albeit in acting capacity pending his confirmation. And it would appear to me from, listening to you that it's not yet Uhuru in terms of people expecting that our judiciary will become sparkling and of the utmost efficiency, such as our justices are capable of delivering. We understand that we're going to have to wait a bit more. Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Abayomi.
Of course. I want to just simply, I think Jay want to add it to confirm your position that is not Uhuru. We have had a number of reforms. You must really recognize that we have had a number of reforms, the so-called judicial reforms. But what kind of reform can you make in a house that has a defective foundation?
Indeed.
Not much.
Point taken, Dr. Abayomi.
That's the problem of our nation. Thank you.
Point taken. Thank you very much for making time for us this morning.
Thank you.
Okay then.